Welcome back to the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast as I switch out the camera function to try and get this exactly where I want it to go. This is the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast, as I said, which is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network. It is part of the Believe Network. And this episode is presented by our partners at FanDuel. You know that this is going to be a good episode. You know why? It's because Matt Lawson's name is attached to it. It means we are going to be talking about something really good. And he's going to bring a lot of knowledge, which is why we love having him on and we enjoy talking to him. Today, after last week, we talked about his updated dynasty rankings, which best in the biz. Now, today, we're going to be talking about the entire biz, everybody in the biz, the consensus dynasty rankings. I'll let Matt share because I don't remember off the top of my head how many dynasty rankings are included in this, but it's a bunch of them. I have a top 300 that's included in this. Obviously, Matt is going with way more players than I did. So I guess towards the end, I don't know exactly how many players everybody submitted. It's not the same player pool, but we're not going to be going to talk about, where two different people ranked somebody at 450 versus 478. We're not going to get to that one. We're going to talk about players more towards the top with the consensus dynasty rankings. We will be bringing Matt in just a moment so that we can discuss how the dynasty landscape looks right now. So thank you for tuning in for this. I'm excited to get into it, maybe talk about some players that we have ranked differently, players that were either lower than everyone else on or higher than everyone else on. We shall see, but we will definitely be getting into talking about a ton of different players, super relevant for any dynasty league. You should value them. This is going to be a focus on category leagues. We will probably mention points leagues, but I know that not as many analysts do points dynasty rankings. That's not something that I have done. Eventually, I plan to, but not right now. I think it's just Matt and Joseph from #basketball. So we'll probably take a glance at those at the end. But this is going to be primarily the consensus dynasty rankings for category leagues, which shouldn't be dramatically different from points leagues, but we will definitely talk about the players that stick out the most as very different in points leagues at the end when we get to that. But for now, let's bring in Matt Lawson. All right, and we welcome Matt Lawson here. As I said, we are going to be discussing some consensus dynasty rankings. Matt, two questions for you just to start us here. One, how are you? And two, how many rankings are included in this set? Because I don't remember the number for this one.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm doing great. I've been getting like a slow trickle of media day news coming in this morning, from like the Knicks and the Nets. It's great. I live for this. So I'm already like contemplating Jaeger Demon's plantar fascia situation and how that's going to impact the upcoming season. It's really exciting. On top of that, these consensus dynasty rankings are exciting. Just released these this week for the categories consensus dynasty rankings. I found 11 different dynasty rankings across the internet, some behind paywalls, some free, but scoured the internet for every single one. So we have a really true consensus here. This is something that's available on my Patreon. I try to do it every few months to be able to give people an idea of what the market for players looks like. I think this is a really good way to be able to do it because these are thoughtfully done. If you've ever done dynasty rankings of your own before, it is such a different exercise than just being in a dynasty league. You have to consider every single player. You have to, have a take on everyone and then consider them against each other. So anyone who's done this is pretty into dynasty, is a smart manager, and there's still quite a bit of range. And one of the big things here, the averages are nice. It's nice to be able to see averages and get an idea of what kind of the wisdom of the crowds is overall. But I really like to be able to see the high and the low range on players because that gives you a better sense for your league where players might be valued. Maybe the manager who rosters, often the manager who rosters a player, holds them in high regard. They might hold them at the highest level that you see in these rankings. But it's always possible that they are looking to be able to move off of someone because they're more on that low range. And it's a nice barometer of where to look to make your trade offer. I suggest to people as a guideline, look to where that low rank is on a player, and that's probably where you want to be negotiating, at least at the start of trade negotiations, to acquire someone. Don't overpay out of the gate. Don't pay that high-end price tag, because it's possible that the other manager is more on the lower range on that player, even though they rostered him. So it's really helpful to be able to do that. Also in these rankings, I've included the change from the July consensus, so you can kind of get an idea of which direction the market is moving on certain players. And I've also included this column that says Matt versus the consensus. So you can see for the dynasty rankings that I just released in the last week, how does my ranking compare to what the consensus is? And my ranking is in the consensus, so it does have some small weight for these rankings on where the consensus falls. But overwhelmingly, there are a number of players where I'm much higher or much lower than consensus. Those would be where I think the best buys and sells in the dynasty market are. So this is a really valuable tool that I think if you're looking to make some moves before the season starts, if you want to be able to improve your team before everyone kind of figures out where player values are headed, get a steal in the offseason, this is a great place to be able to do it. It kind of gives you the best intel that I think is available for what the dynasty market looks like and where you should be looking to buy and sell players.
Yeah, and the top of the consensus dynasty rankings, I don't think looks too different for anyone. I mean, to consensus top 4, we can see that here, that nobody had anybody other than Victor Wembanyama, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, and Luka Doncic in their top 4. And then I think things start getting a little bit more interesting as we get past that. Just with the consensus order, we have Cade Cunningham at 5, Cooper Flagg at 6, Anthony Edwards 7, Chet Holmgren 8, Jalen Williams 9, Giannis Antetokounmpo 10. But if you're watching, you can see. If not, then I'll tell you the range here is, it kind of seems like another tier here with Cade, Cooper Flagg, and Anthony Edwards all between 5 and 8, and then with Chet, Jalen Williams, their range is 8 to 18, 8 to 19. Giannis is 6 to 23, so kind of all over the place here. And I guess we've talked about this previously when we've gone through kind of this top 10 or top 25 order, that this is kind of where you see differing opinions, and where, just based on who you ask, players are valued very differently. Anybody here in particular kind of stand out to you as like within this range being either like really high or really low? I think the Giannis one to me is obviously very interesting, with him being ranked as high as 6, but as low as 23.
Yeah, Giannis is polarizing for a lot of reasons. Obviously, now he's going to be turning 31 in fairly short order. That for Dynasty, always gives people a little bit of red flags. We talked about on a show, we were talking about older players earlier this offseason, the idea that, there's maybe some hope that Giannis will be able to continue to age gracefully, but he certainly is the kind of player more like a Russell Westbrook who depends on explosive athleticism for a lot of his production. It was nice to see him add the mid-range game and bolster that to his game last year. And I think that could help him a little bit to be able to continue on, but he doesn't shoot the 3 the way that you would like to see for a player to be able to age really well. And that seems to be the best quality in players who age well through their 30s and kind of lengthen their primes. LeBron James did it with the Lakers, adding the 3 ball in higher volume to his game, which allowed him to continue to be a big-time fantasy producer throughout his 30s and now even into his 40s. So I think there's some doubt there with Giannis. And also there's just the natural polarization on how do you value a player who completely submarines the free throw percentage category. That, to some people, they don't want to play with that on their dynasty team. They think it's too limiting, and understandable that can make it a little bit of a more difficult fit. I'm somewhere in between on Giannis. I have him a little bit lower than consensus, but I'm not all the way on the back end of having him in the 20s. I think he's going to be super productive this year. I'd probably take him 5th in categories leagues this season, and higher in points leagues as far as redraft leagues, but dynasty a little bit lower because of the age, because of the chance that he just doesn't age as well as we would like to see. And I think the other really interesting thing here is the Cade Cunningham, Cooper Flagg, Anthony Edwards tier right below the top 4. Really understandable with Cade and Anthony Edwards. We've already seen it on the court, and I think there's still room to grow. Both 24 years old. And this season, they're probably going to be going somewhere between like 5th and 8th in most standard leagues, in redraft leagues. So understandable that they would have similar position in the dynasty league. And this is actually kind of a strange time where we have the top 10 for at least the top 8 or so of dynasty league ADP looking fairly similar to what you're going to see in a redraft league. Those top 4 are going to be the top 4 in your redraft league. Then you're probably going to have Kate and Anthony Edwards coming off pretty quickly thereafter. Giannis as well. Trey Young, who we're going to get to in a second, also around that level. So we've got some projection with guys for the future like Cooper Flagg, Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams, where they're a little bit higher than what you're going to be taking them in redraft this season. That makes sense. You can see growth in all of their games. And I think Chet's the one here, along with Cooper Flagg, where we're the furthest away from maybe what this idealized version of them is going to look like in their prime. I think there's still quite a bit of projection for where Chet's offensive game could go in his prime that we have not seen yet. But we still see that really high floor because of the rebounding, the blocks, the field goal percentage. And then with Cooper Flagg, we're going to get this kind of point Cooper situation in Dallas this year that I think is going to buoy his fantasy value. And then in the future, I think you're going to see that full kind of blemishless fantasy stat set come around for Cooper as his efficiency grows in the NBA, as you see the defensive playmaking grow. He's going to have plenty of, I think, top 5 fantasy seasons across his prime. This year could easily be a 3rd-round value if everything kind of breaks right in fantasy. So you can understand why people are so optimistic about him in Dynasty.
Yeah, my expectations for him this year were a little bit higher before they signed D'Angelo Russell because I thought he was going to get more playmaking opportunities. I'm sure they'll still use him as a point guard. They experimented with that a bit during Summer League, and I don't see why they would stop just until Kyrie Irving returns at least. So that'll definitely be someone that I'm keeping an eye on, obviously. Everyone is going to be keeping an eye on Cooper Flagg, see how he does during his rookie year. Going down just a little bit further, but the next few players being Trey Young at 11, Evan Mobley at 12, Amen Thompson 13, LaMelo Ball 14, and then we get into like the Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton range. But Amen Thompson is going to be a player that everyone's going to be watching this year because with Fred VanVleet now expected to miss all this season after tearing his ACL, the question is Amen Thompson now going to be the primary point guard? Obviously, Houston hasn't said anything yet, but the expectation, I think, from at least many of us is that Amen Thompson is going to get the opportunity to kind of run this offense. Obviously, Reed Shepherd is there and will probably get more of an opportunity than we were expecting this season. I'm sure that Aaron Holiday will still get plenty of minutes, but as far as the player that we're probably most excited about and was already going to play a lot, now just gets an extra boost, it's Amen Thompson, who could have, I don't know, just an incredible season. He was really good down the stretch of last season, and now a playmaking boost for him. And he's got a couple pretty good players to pass it to in Kevin Durant and everyone else on this roster. So what are your expectations for Amen Thompson? Could you see him, kind of soaring up these rankings by this time next year?
Well, for my rankings, even before the Fred VanVleet injury, Amen Thompson was already soaring up the rankings, and reevaluating and refreshing my entire rankings for this latest set. If you're seeing that high ranking of number 8, that's me. I have Amen Thompson at number 8. That's before the Fred VanVleet injury, and that was because what I think Amen Thompson could be, I thought that was going to happen in the next season or two, that he would be able to do what we saw him do with Fred VanVleet off the court last year, where his assist rate nearly doubled. I thought that future was good enough a reason to be able to say that Amen Thompson was a top 8 dynasty asset. And now that timetable is pushed up. The future is now. He's going to get that opportunity this season. The assists are going to go through the roof. You're going to see him be a nightly triple-double threat because of the rebounding, because of his ability to be able to play make. And then on top of that, you're going to get one of the strongest steals and blocks combined producers in the entire NBA. And, oh, by the way, really impactful field goal percentage on top of it. So it's kind of a version of like prime Giannis, not with the scoring at the same level, but the stat set is going to be similar. Yes, you're not going to get threes. The free throw percentage is going to hurt. Not as bad as Giannis, but it's not going to be good. But beyond that, he is going to be stuffing the stat sheet every single night. And for Amen, this is a guy who his stat set transcends both categories and points leagues. I've got him in the same place in both rankings. And that was before we knew that he was going to get accelerated into the role that I thought he was going to have in the next year or two when Fred VanVleet was was kind of moved on from by the Houston Rockets. So this is incredible news for Amen Thompson, who I think has a good argument to be able to move up into that Cooper Flagg, Anthony Edwards, Cade Cunningham level. That's probably where I would consider him. I think it is, just because you're going to get that immediate production. I think he could compete with Anthony Edwards and Cade Cunningham in fantasy production this season, and he's younger than them. So there's every reason to be able to be just as optimistic about him as those other two. And I ultimately was probably too low having him at number 8 without knowing and having the foresight to be able to see that Fred VanVleet's ACL was going to tear. So we're looking at a situation now where Amen Thompson, if people haven't caught up to the level of asset that he is, because I got grief from people about having Amen at number 8. People thought that it was too much hype. We've gone too far. And guess what? We haven't gone far enough. And I think there might be a moment here before people realize it, to be able to still get him as a player that people view as in the teens in dynasty rankings. It's going to be difficult because I think everyone's seen the Fred VanVleet news. But if you can still buy at that level, absolutely do it. Full confidence in Amen Thompson as someone who is at that level just below in dynasty, the top 4. That's where I think Amen Thompson needs to be able to be viewed now.
Yeah, and if you're watching, you can see some people have him ranked as low as 20. So if you're able to get him in that teens range, then that is incredible value for him. But Matt, when you figure out that foresight and that ability to be able to predict ACL injuries, please let me know and post on that consistently so that we can always be on the lookout for ACL tears.
If I get that level of foresight, you will never see me again. I'll have my Biff Tannen Sports Almanac, and I'll just be hitting my parlays every single night.
All right. Let's keep it pushing down the dynasty rankings. We still have Matt here because he hasn't been able to get that foresight yet. And he's still here to bless us with his knowledge after we have Jason Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton, who we've talked about a number of times because they're both going to miss this whole season, but they're so good that you still take them in the top 20. We have a few players next in Tyrese Maxey, Scotty Barnes, Jalen Johnson, Karl Anthony Towns. Matt, let's talk about Jalen Johnson because we both had him ranked 11, and that's the highest ranking. He's ranked as low as 26. I'm pretty confident that at this time next year, or heck, within the next few months, more people will have him ranked higher than 26 or even in the 20s. I think it's going to be pretty clearly at least a top 20 player to basically everyone because he's incredibly talented, well-rounded stat production. He's not the best shooter, but he's gotten better. Not too many weaknesses to his game. If there are injury concerns, I think we've talked about this. There's no reason to really think, okay, he's just an injury-prone player because he has, bad ankles or bad knees or anything like that. Like it was 2 separate shoulder injuries on each shoulder last year. Like it's random freak accidents. So it's nothing that we can really hold against him and say, okay, like I'm really worried about your knee moving forward. So it could just be that he's really healthy this upcoming season. And I think if that happens, we're going to see him make an all-star team and potentially do even more.
I agree with that completely. I've been ahead on Jalen Johnson every single year of his NBA career, had him really high in my rookie rankings, well ahead of his draft slot coming out of the draft. Continued to have him really high in my dynasty rankings through his first season where he was inexplicably in the G League rather than playing with the Hawks. And these injuries have created this sustained buying window for Jalen Johnson that have suppressed his value. But I think I have him ranked number 15 in my redraft rankings for categories leagues. He's even higher in points leagues this season. So it feels light to project him at number 11 in dynasty rankings, given the fact that he isn't even 24 years old yet. This is yet another buying opportunity where, you have people who have Jalen Johnson as low as number 26 in rankings. I think that there's definitely a perception of him of being behind a lot of the players that we just looked at above. And I would love to be able to get Jalen Johnson in this moment because I don't think he's ever going to be cheaper than this again. I agree with you that this is going to be yet another breakout season. And I think maybe finally people will come to a consensus to appreciate how good Jalen Johnson is after this season, especially in a season where the Hawks, I think, are going to be a competitive team that is going to have some of the interest of NBA audiences, and it's going to give him an opportunity to be able to shine. I wouldn't be surprised at all, like you said, that if he does make an all-star game this season. So put in that inquiry on Jalen Johnson, just like we said on Amen Thompson. See if you can get them at these kind of like lower consensus levels, because we both agree that they are definitely top 12 dynasty assets on the rise.
And maybe the G League thing ended up being good for his development. We won't know because we won't know what the alternative was. But that is the Nate McMillan effect, to have this young player that ends up being an all-star talent just sitting in the G League and not getting minutes over other players. So really fun for Hawks fans. Shout out to Quinn Snyder for playing him a lot more. Next few players after Jalen Johnson, I think we just mentioned Karl Anthony Towns, who is as high as 8, as low as 29. Nice range there. Nice range for a few of these players with Alperen Şengün, Devin Booker, Paolo Banchero, Jaren Jackson Jr., Franz Wagner, Donovan Mitchell, a few other players in that range. Let's see. Let's talk about Devin Booker. I feel like he's not a player that we've spent too much time with this offseason, but maybe it's because he's not the most interesting one to talk about, because the expectation is that he's going to have a monster season with no Kevin Durant, no Bradley Beal, introducing Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks. So I don't know, is your expectation that Devin Booker is going to pop off this season?
Yeah, I have Devin Booker at number 10 in my categories rankings for redraft this year. So I think that he's going to have a really big season. And we've had Devin Booker on the Suns long enough that we've already kind of seen this arc before, where like he's the guy and it's point book, and we know what that looks like. Kind of that pre-Chris Paul Suns era. We got this from Booker. He was super productive in fantasy leagues. I think we're going to get exactly the same thing. Yes, they're going to put the ball in Jalen Green's hands someone else needs to score on this team, and they're really going to be lacking in anybody else to be able to score. But overwhelmingly, Devin Booker is going to have the ball. He is by far the best playmaker on this roster. He's going to have the opportunity to see those assist numbers skyrocket this season, and that's been the best version of Devin Booker that we've seen in fantasy, where he has the ball going through him quite a bit. He already did last year on a roster with Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. Now that's removed from the equation, and it's wheels up for a huge Devin Booker season. So at 29 years old, this season, like, there's still a good bit of prime left. The only real consideration is that he always seems to get nicked up and miss some time in every single season, which can be a frustration in head-to-head. But I don't think there's any kind of like significant injury concern for him. It's just someone who tends to miss, probably about 14 to 18 games every season, and you just have to deal with the reality of that. But I think that there's a lot of optimism if you are a contender to buy in on Devin Booker, to get the benefit of it, because this Phoenix Suns team is also going to be super limited in their ability to be able to dramatically change this roster. They don't have draft assets to be able to connect with money to be able to go get another star to be able to put next to Devin Booker. They're going to be limited by what they did to have to get Bradley Beal off of this roster by stretching him. They're going to have Jalen Green under contract for the next few seasons, where he's likely not going to be able to be traded on that unless they attach something to be able to do it. And they just spent the best draft pick that they're likely to have on Kamen Malawach, who's not going to be a scorer, who's going to be, obviously an interior center. So this is an opportunity to be able to get, I think, a few more really great prime seasons out of Devin Booker. So if you're a contender, look at where that window matters to you, the next few seasons where you think you can win championships, Devin Booker is a great player to be able to target.
And one more player in this range, because I agree with you. I have Devin Booker very high in my redraft rankings. Well, I think around that 10 range, maybe 11, but somewhere around there. Paolo Banchero, I think, is a really interesting player to talk about specifically in category leagues, because he does have the reputation of being a points league player and significantly better in points leagues. And that's, the lack of defensive stats and the subpar shooting percentages. But obviously he's a star player on the rise. He can improve in his efficiency and has that upside there. I landed with him at 25, which is kind of in the middle. Some people have him as high as 13. Some have him as low as 36. Where do you kind of land on Banchero? Is he kind of a polarizing player to you as well?
Yeah, I have him at number 25 in categories, and you're right. Like the split with points leagues is massive. On the points league consensus, which is the second tab that we have, he's number 8. So there's ahead of Cooper Flagg, I believe. There's a huge difference in the value between those two in those two formats for Paolo Banchero, and it's kind of similar to what we've seen from someone like Julius Randle over time, where the stat set is just not super conducive, right, at least right now, for categories leagues, because he's not particularly efficient from the field or the free throw line, and the steals and blocks production isn't there to be able to buoy that. But you're getting those points, rebounds, assists, and I think that PRA production is something that is valuable in leagues, and that's why I don't dock him massively, because he's not like a full 9 category producer the way that we would want him to be. And I also think that there's going to be growth in his game. It reminds me a little bit of Jason Tatum, where at the beginning of his career, Tatum's shot profile, especially coming from Duke, and he slowly adapted it in the early years of his career, but it was too mid-range heavy. He didn't get to the rim enough. He didn't take enough threes. And kind of the Morey ball of it, over time, he gave in and became more of a three-point shooter and got to the rim at a better level, finished at a better level. Paulo should be an even more extreme version of that when it comes to getting to the rim. The idealized version of Paulo Banchero stops going for those mid-range shots and continues to barrel his way to the rim because of his size. He should be getting to the rim the way that we're seeing Giannis and Evan Mobley, because he's, approximately the size of those guys and has a handle and is able to drive. He just doesn't get all the way there as often as you'd like, because he's fallen too in love with his mid-range. So I'm hopeful that that's going to correct itself over time. We've seen that, I think at the very least, he's going to be one of the top scorers in the NBA, but I think he can become a much more efficient scorer. And when that happens, that's why I have him kind of near this consensus value around number 25, even though right now in redraft rankings, I would have him significantly lower than almost all of the young players that we've talked about so far.
Agreed. Let's keep it pushing down these rankings a little bit. After Franz Wagner, we have Donovan Mitchell, Domantas Sabonis, Jalen Brunson, Anthony Davis, Darius Garland. This is kind of an interesting spot here with a lot of older players kind of in this range. Those players that are still producing at a really high level, but I guess you can't rank too much higher because of their age, but you can't rank too much lower because of how good they are. Obviously, Darius Garland doesn't fit that great, and then De'Aaron Fox would be next after this. We'll just keep it going down here because I actually do have Trey Murphy that I want to ask you about specifically, but after Fox, it goes Harper, Dylan Harper, Desmond Bane, Trey Murphy, Bam Adebayo. And with Trey Murphy, I don't know, you mentioned preseason or media day quotes earlier, and I don't know if you saw the one that Joe Dumars had, where he was basically asked if there's going to be a playoff expectation or playoff mandate. And he said, no, I've not put that expectation on anyone. It wasn't like, okay, we made this trade, I expect to make the playoffs. That's short-sighted to me. And our partners at FanDuel have the Pelicans at plus 880 odds to make the playoffs and minus 3,000 to miss the playoffs. So you can bet on the Pelicans missing the playoffs. We've talked about the Pelicans a number of times, saying, like, what are they doing? I think that's a fair question to ask. The other quote I saw from Trey Murphy was that I think they asked if the expectation was for him to be an all-star this year, and he said absolutely. So I'm expecting a big year out of Trey Murphy. I'm hoping for a big year out of Trey Murphy. Is that your expectation as well, that this could be a really fun season from Trey Murphy, despite what could be another tumultuous season for the Pelicans?
Yeah, Trey Murphy is a guy that I have higher than consensus. I'm about like 8. I think, yeah, I am the high at that number 27 that you see there for the high on Trey Murphy. And part of that is because Trey Murphy's breakout and his breakouts that he has continue to kind of be masked by the horrible basketball being played in New Orleans every season, the fact that the games don't matter. And it is created this perception that Trey Murphy might just kind of be a garbage time player or someone who just only really does well once Zion is hurt and no one else is available. But I think that does a disservice to how much he has added to his game. This is a guy who, coming in to the league out of Virginia, was not considered to be someone that you would probably run a lot of offense through, that'd be able to create his own shot, maybe he would be like a 2 dribbles and a good decision kind of guy, attacking closeouts a little bit, but that would be it. But we've seen him dramatically improve as a driver, to be able to get by guys, to be able to get to the rim, he makes incredibly athletic plays in transition. He's actually one of the better athletes as a wing in the NBA. And I don't think people realize that as well, because he's kind of known more as a shooter, or at least was known more as a shooter. And he's evolved quite a bit, to the point that I don't know if perception in everyone's leagues has caught up to the reality that Trey Murphy, I think, is the Pelicans' best player at least the most available player. And I think that he's right there with Zion Williamson in talent. Even with how talented Zion Williamson is all around, I think Trey Murphy, what he brings to winning basketball is at a different level than anyone else on this Pelicans roster on both sides of the ball. Not more of a neutral defender than a strong one, but with his size, he could obviously fit on any team. I think any NBA team would love to have Trey Murphy. So we're not seeing an iteration of the New Orleans Pelicans that I think will look anything like this in 3 seasons. I think almost everybody on this roster is going to be gone in 3 seasons, and the front office probably will be too. But I could easily see Trey Murphy still being here. And the opportunity for Trey Murphy in the future is going to be really strong. There are going to be seasons. I don't know if it'll be this year, but it easily could be. Zion goes down again. It's suddenly all the Trey Murphy show. And we're going to see incredible numbers from him like you did during stretches last year when Zion was out. And as easily as next season, that could also be the case, where a significant portion of this offense, where a huge portion of the usage is handed over to Trey Murphy. And I think he's worth it as a player to be able to do that. It wouldn't just be because of circumstance. So this is another player where I'm ahead of consensus. I think that there's a good opportunity to be able to get him, especially because he's going to be starting the season, maybe with the start of it in doubt because of this labrum surgery that he had. It's a nice moment, a buying moment on Trey Murphy.
Yeah, every team would love to have a player like Trey Murphy, or Trey Murphy specifically, because he does fit, like you said, with everyone. It's just that everyone else in New Orleans seems to be not as great of a fit with each other. But we'll see exactly how that works out for them this season. Next up, after Trey Murphy and Bam Adebayo, it goes Brandon Miller, Jamal Murray, Jaylen Brown, Dyson Daniels, Ja Morant, Tyler Hero, who's going to miss a little bit of time early this season. The expectation is it shouldn't be a lengthy absence, but he did undergo like a little, was it ankle procedure or foot procedure? I don't remember off the top of my head, but Ja Morant, I think, is a pretty interesting player to talk about in this range. We saw, obviously, played 9 games 2 years ago, and this past season played 50 games, was productive, but not quite as productive as he had been in past seasons. Taylor Jenkins fired. Now, I think the offense will be ran a little bit more tailored to Ja Morant, and specifically pick and rolls with Zach Edey, which could lead to a big season for both of them. Is that your expectation here for Ja Morant? And yeah, do you see that lasting beyond this season?
Yeah, I think with Ja Morant, there's so many different factors in play. The Grizzlies win when Ja Morant is available. They win at an extremely high level in seasons where he has been available. They've been, at the top of the Western Conference, and there is a direct, dramatic impact on winning for having Ja Morant on your basketball team. The problem is he's not available as often as we need him to be. This year, I'm projecting him to play in 62 games, which I think the Grizzlies would take if they could guarantee that were the case. Obviously, they would love more, but that would make a dramatic improvement on what his average availability has been across the last 4 seasons. And I think one of the nice developments for Ja Morant, he seems to be figuring out the free throw percentage a little bit. The free throw shooting has improved to the point that it's not a liability for him in fantasy, which was kind of one of the bigger gaps that we had for him in categories versus points leagues. Points leagues, he was always a little bit of a stronger player because of the points and assists. The inefficiency from the field and the line didn't matter. Now you still have some of the inefficiency from the field. It's probably going to be a lower 40s percentage in field goal percentage, and that's going to hurt you. You're not going to get blocks from him. But everything else is going to be neutral to positive, other than turnovers. And I think that Morant, I have around number 40 in my categories rankings as in redraft as well. So at 26 years old, this is kind of what I expect his prime to be able to look like, where he's a top 50 fantasy producer. There's going to be questions about availability because his play style is likely to lead to some injuries. I mean, he plays a violent style as far as confrontation at the rim. And, he's talked about, he's not going to dunk, or he's not going to be as risky. We know that's not going to work because that's the only way Ja Morant can play basketball. So you're just going to have to kind of, hold your breath and hope that you're going to get those fully available seasons, because when you do, he's going to be extremely impactful, both for the Grizzlies on the basketball court, but also for your fantasy team.
All right. And after Ja Morant and Tyler Hero, we get into a few of the older players as well as some younger players with Kevin Durant at 42, and then Steph Curry Asar Thompson, James Harden, Austin Reeves, Alex Sarr. A nice mix of players here in this range. I wasn't the highest. I was hoping I would be the highest, but the highest on Asar Thompson, who I have at 40, as high as 37. Someone had him ranked at 37, as low as 78. I guess we kind of did talk about this a little bit in the last episode, so maybe we won't spend too long on Asar. Where do you land on him? And I guess, is this going to be both Thompson twins enjoying a breakout season?
Yeah, I think for Asar, I've come around to the idea that I'm ahead of projections for most people because I think he's going to play more minutes this season than it seems some do. Last season, obviously, ramped up really slowly coming back from the blood clot issue. Didn't have the off season and preparation that he needed to be able to have because he wasn't allowed to be able to participate in basketball activities. This has obviously been an entirely different off season for him, a real full off season for him. And you saw in the playoffs how important he was to the Pistons against the Knicks. I think that's exactly the kind of role he's going to have this season. I think he's going to play 30 plus minutes a night this year. And in those kinds of minutes, he can be kind of a just slightly reduced version of a lot of what we see in Amen Thompson. And you heard how glowingly we spoke about Amen Thompson earlier in this show. Asar is in line for a breakout season. Everyone is seeing it coming. And he's going to be difficult to be able to acquire in fantasy leagues. And I think that with him, there's real hope with Fred Vinson there because we've seen it in stretches of him being like a slightly better shooter. Maybe we can get to the point where in his career, he's at least an okay catch and shoot 3-point shooter from three. I don't think he needs to be, though. And like with Amen Thompson, I think he can be super impactful on the game on both sides of the ball because of his, elite top percentile athleticism in the NBA. Asar is going to be able to impact both sides of the ball in a winning way, and it's going to keep his minutes up regardless of whether he shoots or not. And you're going to get steals, blocks, assists, rebounds, and just enough scoring to be able to make it all come together. I think you're also going to see that field goal percentage continue to be more impactful as he is able to make more and more plays in transition. And this is another development that I don't think people fully understand. There's kind of an idea that Cade Cunningham is kind of slow and deliberate and that the Pistons don't play with pace with him. It's not true. Cade led the fast break at an extremely high level last season. It was a big part of what the Pistons did and why they were successful because they were not that efficient in the half court. And I think you're going to continue to see that with Asar Thompson being a huge part of that transition game, which is going to help boost his scoring quite a bit. You'll see that connection with Cade Cunningham in transition. And I think it's leading to a season this year where he could easily be a guy who jumps into the top 50 in fantasy production and makes this dynasty ranking look like it's far too conservative to have him just inside the top 50 as a 22-year-old.
Yeah, looking back to when the Thompson twins were getting drafted out of Overtime Elite, it was a lot of different opinions on how that type of talent or type of competition would translate into the NBA. Because I know I wasn't not like pessimistic about it, but I wasn't super convinced just because I wasn't entirely sure. I think there's a lot of question marks, but it's pretty cool to see how good both of them have become so quickly. We talked about Austin Reeves last time because we know that I think you are the highest, if not one of the highest, but I assume the highest on Austin Reeves. And we have Alex Sarr, Miles Turner, Pascal Siakam. I think Josh Giddey ends up being one of the more interesting players to talk about because it seems like people are either very, very high on him or very low on him. Where do you kind of land with that? Because I was checking the rankings. I expected to be the lowest on him, or at least close to it. And I have him down at 62, but it looks like someone has him as low as 71. But he goes as high as 35. So it is a nice range here. Where do you land with Josh Giddey?
I'm a little higher than this consensus on Giddey just because I think this season and likely the season after are going to be really big fantasy seasons for Josh Giddey. But it's hard to be able to balance because for a player who's only 23 years old, he could have a top 20 fantasy season, and most projections have him in that range. If you are 23 years old and you're already having top 20 fantasy seasons, we're usually talking about you as around a top 10 dynasty asset. And you see even the highest on Josh Giddey are not close to that. And, the highest being at number 35. And I could see that creeping up, especially if he's super productive early in the season. But we need to remember, and I think we can be too short-sighted in this, that before the competition level drops significantly and before the Zach LaVine trade, Billy Donovan didn't want to play Josh Giddey. He was constantly taking him off of the court. His minutes were in the mid-20s. He was playing the least physical basketball we've ever seen from him. He was more of a defensive liability than we had seen in Oklahoma City because he suddenly wasn't protected by the excellent defenders that he was surrounded with in Oklahoma City and wasn't able to be hidden as easily. And it was a complete disaster. It really looked like Josh Giddey was not going to be able to be anything more than a rotation player when we're talking about October, November, December of last season. And he obviously turned that around, but he did it in the portion of the season that doesn't look like what the beginning of the season looks like. It doesn't look like what the play-in looked like for him, where he got absolutely exposed. So there are still considerable risks here. Yes, they've given him a long-term contract. Yeah, he's going to have the ball in his hands a ton for Chicago this season, but you could still see situations where Billy Donovan moves away from him because the defense is so unplayable. And I think the defense will be awful for Chicago this year because you've got near the end of his career, Nikola Vucevic on the back line, and then Modest Buzelis, who's not a plus defender. You're going to have Kobe White, who is a very poor defender out there with Giddey as well. And then maybe you're going to get some defense on the court with Isaac Okoro or Ayo Dosunmu. But those guys are not going to create a functional defense. So I think this is going to be a season where if the Chicago Bulls are just willing to live with the fact that they're going to be a layup line defensively and just try to outscore teams, kind of the way that the Hawks have in stretches where they're just going to have a night where it's 145 to 144 and just live with that, maybe that's the way that Chicago is going to try to play. But if Giddey, his shooting regresses in any way, suddenly it becomes a lot harder to be able to keep him on the court. If he plays less physically than he did at the end of last season and he starts playing a softer game where he's kind of not using his body defensively or to be able to drive to the basket the way that we saw early in the season, it could all kind of fall apart quickly. And it could definitely fall apart quickly if the Bulls ever do make changes to this roster that, prioritize someone else having the ball in their hands more. So one of the most difficult players to be able to rank in Dynasty. I can understand why there's a massive range on him. It really now just matters how much does the next couple seasons of production look, for you? Does it matter a lot for you? Because even though this is a young player, he's probably someone who's better suited to contending rosters where that immediate production is going to matter more.
Yeah, a couple other factors to just make it interesting with Josh Giddey is you mentioned the play-in game where he wasn't very good. They lost by almost 20, but he still had 25, 10, and 4. And I think that's what we're going to see this season is like, even if advanced stats maybe say he's not playing super well, or the results of games suggest that he's not leading the team super well, is those inflated stats could still be there. And that's really helpful for fantasy basketball. It doesn't matter the results of the game or how many points he gives up if he's giving you 20 points, 8 rebounds, 8 assists per game. And then the other thing is there was reports that he was looking for 4 years, 120 million. He ended up with 4 years, 100 million, which makes me think, okay, either he just gave up ground just to get a contract and that's where the Bulls had him valued, or they had him valued as even lower than that. And they kind of met in the middle there. So how does this team actually value him? Do they want to keep it low to make it a more tradable contract? I don't know. The contract to me didn't scream, we have confidence in giving you the keys to our franchise for the next 4 years. That's just not what that said to me. So it wouldn't shock me if there was, I don't know, a lot of other factors that could change his place in this or on this team. So that's why I'm just lower on him. And I'm not super confident that I would want to build my team around him. And that's why I think it's fair. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we'll just get some really fun, productive, somewhat empty stats. And it works pretty well in fantasy for at least a short period of time. Denny Avdia is next at 51. Zion Williamson, BJ Edgecombe, Derek White, Jarrett Allen. With Zion, we obviously have a nice range here. And it's no surprise why. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Is health is a nice factor for him. And that you have to build your team a pretty specific way to maximize him because he's not good from the free throw line. He doesn't hit threes, but the field goal percentage is insane. So somebody has him as high as 28. Others have him as low as 70. Let me see. I'm trying to see where I have him at 50, which is kind of right in the middle here. Again, it's where I ended up. But where do you land with Zion? Are you towards the top, towards the bottom, towards the middle?
Yeah, I think I am the low end here on Zion because I I try because I like the fantasy stat set. I love watching him play basketball, but I could not in a dynasty startup bring myself to make him one of my picks that I'm really relying on. And that's why I've got him, I think, all the way down at 70 in my rankings. And it's just the reality of a guy who I have not seen anything yet to be able to suggest that his body can withstand playing the way that he plays and staying available for NBA basketball games. Everything that we have seen since his time at Duke has said this guy is too big and too explosive to be able to stay on the court. And it is spectacular when he is there. And I love watching it, but I do not have faith at this point that it's going to turn around because we're already exiting the point where it's a little bit easier in life to be able to maintain your weight. I mean, his early 20s, if he was going to be able to be in the best shape of his life, that was actually the time to be able to do it, when it's easier to be able to do it. Only, as someone who just turned 40, it's only getting harder from here. You're not going to be in a position where it feels a little bit easier to be able to lose weight going forward and to be able to keep your body in peak condition. It's just going to get a little more challenging each year going forward. And for that reason, and the fact that there's not that kind of long-term commitment, he has this contract where everything's non-guaranteed year after year. They can get out of the Zion experience whenever they want to. Maybe some other team will trade for him because of the talent and thinking that they can reach him and get him to be able to be in peak physical shape. And I'm sure we will have stretches this season where he's going to look like that guy and probably convince us that it's all going to work out, only to have it pulled away yet again. I just can't make the level of investment that's expected for a guy that I can't reasonably expect to be available based on every piece of evidence that we've seen across his career so far.
Yeah, and trying to find a way to rank a player like that is like, what do you think about? Do you think about, oh, this is where I'd take him in a startup and I'd feel comfortable taking him in a startup, but then others could say, well, this is how I'd value him in terms of a trade, because maybe he does hold more value in terms of a trade versus where you'd actually feel confident taking him in a startup. So it ends up being an interesting balance there, but he's definitely easy to say he's a difficult player to trust. After Jared Allen at 55, we have Walker Kessler at 56, Zach LaVine at 57, Jalen Duren 58, Ivica Zubats 59, Jordan Poole at 60, Suggs at 61, Lauri Markkanen at 62. Let's keep it going. Kyrie Irving 63, OG Anunoby, Mark Williams. Where do you land with a player like OG Anunoby? I was thinking I talked about him on my last podcast I did about myself, just talking about some wings. Where do you land with a player like OG Anunoby? Is he just kind of, you just know exactly what to expect and exactly how to value him, and that's why there isn't much, I guess, of a range here? I mean, other players like Kyrie Irving right above him is anywhere from 49 to 103. Mark Williams right below him is anywhere from 50 to 98. OG Anunoby's 58 to 72. It's right there, and there's 14 spots difference. Nobody really swings too far either way. Is that just kind of the way it is?
Yeah, I think this is a player who's shown that when he's available, he's going to be on the court a ton because he's so impactful on winning. Some nice growth in his game last year in New York, and I think it smoothed out some of the concerns about him offensively. Obviously, the steals production is always going to be really impactful, and you just kind of have a smooth stat line where you know exactly what to expect year after year. He's 28 years old, so he's like right in the midst of his prime. It's safe to be able to think that you're probably going to get 4 or 5 more years of him being impactful in a similar way in fantasy. So this is kind of one of those players who you can have on your roster and just feel completely comfortable with what you're getting. I think he's even put to rest some of the injury concerns that we had earlier in his career. Those can always pop back up, but there's not a lot to be concerned about Anunoby. And he's really one of the players on the Knicks that you have the least doubt that he'll probably just continue to be a part of what they're doing going forward, even with the large contract that he has. I think that he was a lot more impactful defensively than Mikal Bridges last season. I think he will continue to be. I think he's really important to their playoff hopes to be able to have him be the best defender on the court for them. And I'm looking forward to a lot more of the same when it comes to OG Anunoby going forward.
All right. And we've talked about, we've gotten through into the 60s, but I want to spend a little bit of time before we end this talking about points leagues, because I know that there are people that are listening to this that do play in points dynasty leagues. And just taking a look, and I guess we'll just kind of discuss either big changes here or players that obviously stick out towards the top of points leagues, with the top 4 being the same, just kind of in a different order. But we do have Giannis into the top 5, as you mentioned earlier, Paolo Banchero into the top 8 at number 8. What's your overall, I guess, just in case anyone didn't hear it last time when we talked about this, your overall points league versus category league philosophy here, and the way some of these players look a little bit different at the top?
Yeah, so there's a few different varieties of points leagues, but it's important to be able to kind of understand the overall arc of how they're different than categories leagues. First, you're not even in formats that apply a penalty to missing field goal attempts or free throws. You're still going to have a lot less impact from percentages in points leagues than you do in categories leagues. Because of that, you see players who struggle with efficiency from the field and the line, like Paolo Banchero, Giannis, who struggles from the free throw line, be much higher in these rankings. And it's super impactful to be able to have those guys who put up big points, rebounds, and assist totals. Those are the players who end up ranking much higher. If that's kind of their strengths in their category stat set, points, rebounds, and assists, they're probably going to rank much higher, even if they're not efficient from the line or field and they don't generate defensive stats. That just isn't as impactful in any points format, even ones where you get 3 points for blocks and steals, like some points formats. It still just doesn't matter as much because those stats are just so much more rare than a point, rebound, and assist. So even if you're just getting a point or 1.2 or 1.5 points, as you often do in scoring formats for points, rebounds, and assists, that's going to still carry the day and make up the large majority of the fantasy production for these players. And you see that in these rankings. And I also want to throw out here that, you know, my rankings are some of the only points rankings that where I'm actually going through it year round, updating them monthly, and really, you know, thinking of guys completely separately from my categories ranking from them. I do these rankings separately. I'm looking at sleepers default rankings. I'm looking at the kind of NBA official scoring system, which is kind of a little bit more common in DFS. And I'm getting you a picture of how I view this values completely separately from my categories rankings. There are not many points dynasty rankings out there. For this consensus, I only had 3 of them. Mine, the hashtag basketball points league rankings, and also a service called Lineup Experts put out some dynasty rankings in the last couple of weeks that I put in here as well. So it's kind of the Wild West in points dynasty leagues. Value ends up being perceived a lot by what have you done for me lately. There's a lot of recency bias in it. I don't think people really have a sense of dynasty values, and because there aren't many resources for them to be able to see what analysts and experts think about points league dynasty values. So there's real opportunity to make steal trades in your points dynasty league. I think my rankings do a really good job of that. And these consensus rankings will give you a really good idea because I show how far apart I am from consensus. Just if you were able to toss out some of the values in the hashtag points dynasty rankings to people to try to generate trade interest, you can get huge value compared to where I have a lot of players ranked. And this will give you the opportunity to be able to do that. And that's the kind of thing that can turn your team around almost instantly. If you can make a few trades where you're getting massive value, suddenly everything about your squad can change. That's the goal of my resources. That's also why I put out trade calculators for categories and points leagues in the past week as well. It's something that I've created based on the formula used by keeptradecut.com, which is a really famous kind of fantasy football dynasty service where it has crowdsourced dynasty rankings and trade calculators. The idea of the trade calculator that I put together is that it doesn't just let you kind of aggregate value to get to the best player, like trade 5 guys, you know, who have mediocre value to get one really good player. It will punish you for adding in more and more assets, lesser assets, to try to get an elite one. It has a factor that amplifies the value of stud players, so they're not as easy to trade for as in sub trade calculators, where you just need to get to the same overall trade value on each side to be able to say that it's even. And I think that it can be really helpful for points leagues where there just aren't resources like that. These consensus rankings are another great value to be able to use as well. And I think it can make a big difference for people who are in points formats and categories formats, since I have it for both in the consensus rankings and trade calculators for both formats.
Yeah, there's never anything funnier than when someone tries to trade you their entire bench and all their second round picks because some trade value chart said that this trade will be even if you give me your best player and I give you everybody I wasn't going to start or keep on my roster anyway. That's always super, super fun, and why we play Dynasty Fantasy Basketball. Paolo Banchero mentioned as pretty high in comparison to category leagues. Josh Giddey is a good bit higher than what we talked about in the category leagues as well. Other than that, is there anybody that really sticks out to you as significantly higher, significantly lower outside of the couple of players we just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, players like Zion and Ja get boosts in points formats as well. One guy that we've talked about a little bit through the offseason, who I think I'm the highest on, or at least close to, and I still don't have high enough, is Denny Avdia, because I've been running my projections and rankings for this upcoming season, and it's very difficult to not view him already as a top 40 producer for this upcoming season based on what we saw through kind of the final 2/3 of the season last year. And he's not even 25 years old yet. So I think that perception of Denny Avdia in points leagues and also in categories leagues and Dynasty hasn't caught up with the reality of who Denny Avdia is. And I think this is a really good buying moment on him, because he's someone that I continue to think, should I maybe have him in the top 30 of my Dynasty rankings? Should be in the top 25. I look at some of the production and the age, and I believe in him long term. I think he's a really good two-way player as well. There's just the shooting made a nice leap last season. There's really nothing that I don't like about Denny Avdia. I think I've just been ahead of consensus consistently on him. Last offseason, I had him way higher than consensus. Got a lot of questions about it. And early in the season, when Chauncey Billups was, yanking him in and out of the lineup, I thought I had made a huge mistake, but ultimately it paid out. And I think this might be a little similar to the way that I was on Jalen Johnson a couple seasons ago, where I just kept pushing him higher and higher because I was seeing something that I guess not everyone else was, but then eventually came to fruition. And I think there actually is some real similarity between Jalen Johnson and Denny Avdia in some ways. I think these are players who are impactful in similar ways, and I think are undervalued dynasty assets that you should be trying to acquire. So Denny would be another one of those big buys. Points formats, great point rebound, assist producer, and he's going to be really impactful there. In categories leagues, he smoothed out some of the efficiency issues that troubled him. Free throw percentage improved a lot last year. He's not going to get you a ton of steals and blocks production, but he's not going to hurt you there. I just really like him in all formats, and I think that it's someone that people haven't really fully caught up to how good he is yet.
And that type of forward-thinking analysis is why you should give Matt a follow at NBA Dynasty ADP, and be sure to check out his Patreon, which we will link in the description of this episode. Matt, thank you so much, as always, for joining me. What content can we be on the lookout on your Patreon? Obviously, we can check out your most recent Dynasty rankings as well as the consensus rankings there, but what else can we be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so it's been a lot of stuff coming out over the last week. New dynasty rankings. I rank every single rostered player. I give you projections for categories leagues of what I think their peak stat set is going to look like. I can confidently say I don't think anyone puts more time into their dynasty rankings than I do. It's an obsession, but it's something that has been helping people, so I just keep doing it. The trade calculators that I was talking about, the consensus dynasty rankings, these are the most powerful tools in dynasty right now. You will win trades. You will win them massively if you use these as a resource. And for points leagues, like I was saying before, it's really the only thing out there. So if you're playing in a points dynasty league, you got to check it out. You can even, if you go to patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP, you can get a free 7-day trial and just go into all the stuff that I'm talking about. It'll all be accessible to you. If you like it, if you find it valuable, please stick around. If not, it's all good. It's a free trial, and I want you to be able to get the opportunity to do it. I'm trying to make this stuff accessible to everyone because I want people to get to love dynasty basketball and fantasy basketball the way that I do. And I think it's a great way to be able to bring people into the fold in dynasty and keep them there by giving them the resources for them to be able to excel in their leagues. And that's what I want to be able to achieve with this. I'm going to be trying to put out my redraft rankings soon. I think those are super helpful if you're in dynasty leagues, to be able to understand what you think the current season is going to look like. I've got a lot of strong takes about that. It's informed my dynasty opinions. So if you play in redraft or not, make sure to check those out when they're produced. And we're almost there. I mean, we're going to be having preseason games in about 10 days. We're going to be fully into the news cycle with so much stuff coming out. Obviously, the Fred VanVleet injury was massive to changing some dynasty values and reshaping how we're looking up at this upcoming season. But we're going to have more things, hopefully not that catastrophic, but more developments that are going to be changing things dramatically. Every season, during the preseason, during training camp, we get news and we hear about things that we were not expecting. So stay tuned here with us. We're going to keep getting you those that analysis of all those news items, talking about the preseason, talking about where things are headed, getting you out in front of understanding where breakouts are coming and busts before anybody else. That's our mission. That's what we're going to get done for you all.
100%. Be sure to tune in all season long, which, by the way, the regular season starts in less than a month. So we're getting closer to any sort of basketball, but we're getting even closer to that meaningful basketball and being able to actually play fantasy basketball, not just talking about theories in the summer, not just making random trades. We're going to get to actually score points in our fantasy basketball leagues. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast, which is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network, part of the Believe Network, and presented by FanDuel. But as always, thank you to Matt for joining me. And we will be sure to see you guys next time.